I think all of the lies that have been told for more than a year and a half about the Ukrainians are winning, the Ukrainian cause is just, the Russians are evil, the Russians are incompetent, all of that is collapsing. And it's collapsing because what's happening on the battlefield is horrific. The Ukrainians now, we think, have lost 400,000 men killed. And I think we're going to see this army that we've been spending so heavily on increasingly melt away.
In today's analysis, we delve into the evolving crisis in Eastern Europe, particularly following the recent collapse of Avdiivka and the urgent NATO gathering that ensued. We challenge the prevailing narrative with insights from former U.S. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, revealing what many see as Western propaganda and highlighting Russia's stance, which some argue is justified. As tensions mount and geopolitical strategies unfold, we aim to shed light on the complexities of this conflict from a different perspective. The conflict in Ukraine has intensified, with the Ukrainian military facing significant challenges on the eastern and southern front lines. Despite efforts to repel attacks, Ukrainian forces are increasingly stretched thin, struggling against a larger and better supplied Russian military. The situation has grown particularly severe in key regions like Avdiivka, where Ukrainian forces have been compelled to withdraw due to ammunition shortages and overwhelming Russian assaults. These developments underscore the precarious position of Ukrainian troops, battling against a relentless and advancing adversary. In this context of heightened conflict, NATO's struggle to support Ukraine is more evident than ever. NATO's efforts to supply Ukraine with sufficient ammunition and weapons have encountered substantial difficulties. The recent decision by German defense contractor Rheinmetall to open an ammunition factory in Ukraine highlights the desperate need for more resources to sustain the Ukrainian war effort. Despite these efforts, the supply of crucial artillery and tank shells remains a significant challenge, with Western countries unable to meet the demands of a prolonged war. This shortfall has left Ukrainian forces in a vulnerable position, emphasizing the dire need for increased and sustained military support from NATO and its allies. In the aftermath of the Cold War, NATO's eastward expansion has been a contentious issue. Despite assurances in 1990 by then U.S. Secretary of State James Baker to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east, the alliance has since added 11 former Eastern Bloc nations and 3 former Soviet republics. This move, contrary to Russia's understanding of the post-Cold War order, significantly contributed to the deterioration of U.S.-Russian relations. Former U.S. Ambassador George Kennan called it a tragic mistake, foreseeing adverse Russian reactions and questioning the commitment to defend these nations. Russia perceives this expansion as a direct threat, fueling its sense of betrayal and strategic insecurity. This perceived betrayal sets the stage for Russia's actions in Ukraine, a response to what it sees as a broken promise. Russia's intervention in Ukraine, termed a special military operation, is framed as a defensive response to perceived threats. The Kremlin has consistently stated its objectives: demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, ensuring the safety of people in regions that Russia claims have faced genocide, and protecting them from what it describes as direct attacks. This move also reflects Russia's broader security concerns, namely the efforts to integrate Ukraine into NATO and bring the alliance's military infrastructure closer to Russian borders. The Russian government views these actions as undermining its own security and violating Ukraine's neutral status. Despite the West and Ukraine dismissing these reasons, Russia's stance remains firm, portraying its actions as necessary for national and regional security. As we delve deeper into Russia's perspective, let's consider the insights of Douglas Macgregor on these developments. Douglas Macgregor, a former U.S. colonel, offers a critical perspective on Western policies toward Russia, emphasizing the need for a deeper understanding of Russia's security concerns. Macgregor argues that NATO's eastward expansion and the West's military posturing could be perceived as direct threats by Russia, exacerbating tensions and undermining regional stability. He stresses the importance of recognizing Russia's historical and strategic sensitivities, warning that failure to do so could lead to unnecessary escalation. Macgregor advocates for dialogue and diplomacy over military confrontation, suggesting that the West's approach might inadvertently intensify the situation rather than resolve it. His insights point to the complex dynamics of international relations, where actions and policies can have unintended consequences, particularly in the delicate balance of power in Eastern Europe. With the West's unified stance against Russia, President Macron's recent move raises eyebrows. In a notable divergence within the Western alliance, French President Emmanuel Macron's decision to deploy troops to Ukraine sparked controversy. This move, seen as impulsive by some, was quickly met with disapproval and contradiction by NATO allies, signaling a lack of consensus within the alliance. This incident exposes potential fissures in the unified front presented by the West, highlighting differing strategies and approaches to the crisis in Ukraine. Macron's decision and its subsequent rejection by other NATO members illustrate the complexities and challenges of diplomatic and military coordination within an alliance facing a high-stakes international crisis. This brings us to the West's reaction to Russia's clear warnings. President Vladimir Putin's stern warning to NATO reflects a response grounded in Russia's perceived need to safeguard its own security interests. Viewing NATO's military activities and expansion near its borders as aggressive posturing, Putin's warning can be seen as a defensive measure against what Russia considers an encroaching threat. This stance, while contentious, is rooted in Russia's long-standing apprehensions about Western military movements in Eastern Europe. Putin's address, characterized by firmness and resolve, underscores the seriousness with which Russia views these developments and its readiness to take what it deems necessary actions in response. Amidst these tensions, the U.S. role in the conflict deserves scrutiny. In the unfolding Ukraine crisis, the role of the United States has been increasingly contentious. Critics argue that the U.S. has exacerbated tensions by disregarding Russia's repeatedly voiced security concerns. The imposition of sanctions on Russia, described by some as unwarranted, is seen as a catalyst that further fuels the crisis rather than offering a pathway to resolution. This approach, perceived by some as a continuation of a long-standing policy of confrontation towards Russia, raises questions about the ultimate objectives of U.S. policy in Eastern Europe. The stance of the United States is seen as contributing to a deterioration in relations and increasing the prospects of a prolonged conflict in the region. Amidst these developments, Douglas Macgregor offers a critical analysis of America's approach. Douglas Macgregor, aligning with Russia's viewpoint, sharply criticizes U.S. policies towards the Eastern European crisis. He argues that the confrontational approach of the U.S. only serves to widen the existing geopolitical divide, rather than fostering an environment conducive to peace and understanding. Macgregor suggests that this aggressive stance, characterized by sanctions and military posturing, may be counterproductive, intensifying tensions and diminishing the prospects for a diplomatic solution. His critique points to the need for a reassessment of U.S. foreign policy strategies, advocating for a path that prioritizes dialogue over confrontation. As we reflect on Macgregor's analysis, we now turn to a pivotal moment in this saga: President Putin's historic speech. In a momentous 2-hour address, President Vladimir Putin expressed a fervent call for the respect of Russia's sovereignty, challenging what he perceives as the West's double standards in international affairs. Putin's speech, marked by a tone of urgency and resolve, emphasized Russia's desire for security and respect on the global stage. He criticized Western actions and policies, portraying them as hypocritical and detrimental to global stability. This speech, one of the longest and most significant in recent history, encapsulates Russia's stance on the ongoing crisis, highlighting its deep-seated grievances and aspirations for a reformed international order. Putin's declaration set the context for understanding Russia's military strategy, a subject of ongoing global discussion and analysis. Russia positions its military involvement in Ukraine as a strategic defense operation. The Kremlin asserts that its actions are calibrated responses, primarily aimed at protecting Russian-speaking communities in Ukraine and ensuring the security of its borders. This narrative frames the military operation as a necessity, rather than an act of aggression, underlining Russia's claim to be responding to perceived threats to its people and territorial integrity. Moscow's portrayal of this strategy emphasizes a commitment to safeguarding the interests and well-being of ethnic Russians and Russian speakers in the region. The Western media's portrayal of these events, however, tells a different story. The narrative presented by Western media outlets regarding the Ukraine crisis is often criticized for lacking a balanced perspective. Proponents of this view argue that the Western media predominantly echoes the viewpoints of NATO and its allies, neglecting the historical nuances and Russia's side of the story. This portrayal is seen as contributing to a one-sided understanding of the conflict, potentially obscuring the complexities involved and the broader geopolitical context. Critics assert that such biased reporting could influence public opinion and policy decisions, further entrenching divisions and misunderstandings in international relations. As we conclude our exploration, Douglas Macgregor's insights challenge us to view the conflict from a broader perspective. He urges us to consider Russia's actions not as aggression, but as a defense of its national interests, contrasting sharply with the mainstream Western narrative.